Modern life promises comfort, convenience, and endless progress. We have more access to information, entertainment, and opportunities than ever before. Yet paradoxically, more people feel lost, empty, and disconnected from any greater purpose. Why does this contradiction exist? Beneath the surface of success and achievement, an unspoken phenomenon afflicts millions: the existential crisis. This is not a new problem. Philosophers, writers, and thinkers have struggled with this profound unease for centuries. But in today's world, it has taken a different form: a quiet but persistent discomfort, a sense of drifting without direction. Despite its prevalence, society rarely addresses it. Instead, distractions abound, numbing the discomfort but never resolving it. How did we get here? Why does existential emptiness persist despite all the advancements we've made? And more importantly, how do we confront it? An existential crisis is not merely a fleeting moment of doubt. It is a direct confrontation with life's apparent meaninglessness, a realization that all actions may be insignificant in the vastness of time and space. For some, this crisis emerges from loss or suffering. For others, it comes as a sudden, unsettling epiphany, the recognition that identity, purpose, and certainty are fragile constructs. Existentialist philosophy has long placed this struggle at the center of human thought. Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of the burden of freedom. Albert Camus described life as fundamentally absurd, and Friedrich Nietzsche warned of the dangers of nihilism following the death of God. These ideas have been debated throughout history, yet today, society treats existential crisis as a deviation, something to be ignored, medicated, or drowned out with distractions. But ignoring it does not make it disappear. It only makes it more pervasive, creeping into the fabric of daily life in ways we fail to notice until it fully takes hold. In the modern era, the existential crisis manifests in subtle but devastating ways. Information overload, rather than enlightening, overwhelms. Social media, rather than connecting, isolates. Technological progress, rather than freeing us, alienates us from deeper meaning. We live in a constant flood of stimuli, perpetually entertained but rarely fulfilled. There is a collective illusion that happiness lies in the next achievement, the next upgrade, the next experience. But what happens when we reach all of these milestones and still feel something is missing? Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard described this as silent despair, an internal emptiness that external distractions cannot fill. This crisis is not just an abstract philosophical issue. It has real consequences for mental health, human relationships, and the way we structure our lives. Anxiety, depression, and an overarching sense of dissatisfaction are not random afflictions. They are symptoms of a deeper existential void that modern society struggles to acknowledge. So, how do you face your own existential crisis? Have you ever stopped to ask whether you are truly living with purpose or merely going through the motions? This is the defining dilemma of our time. And this is where Viktor Frankl's perspective becomes essential. Unlike other existentialist thinkers, Frankl did not believe life was inherently meaningless. Instead, he argued that meaning is something we must discover and create. His perspective did not come from abstract philosophy alone, but from direct experience with unimaginable suffering. Having endured the horrors of concentration camps, Frankl emerged with a profound insight. Even in the worst conditions, human beings can find purpose. If there is an answer to the existential crisis, perhaps it lies in what we fear most: the willingness to confront our pain, our uncertainty, and the very essence of what it means to be human. Before Viktor Frankl became one of the most influential thinkers in existential psychology, he was a prisoner. Stripped of his name, his identity, and everything he held dear, he faced suffering on a scale that defies comprehension. The Nazi concentration camps were designed not just to kill, but to break the human spirit. Every day, prisoners watched as loved ones were taken away, knowing they would never return. Hunger gnawed at their bodies, disease spread unchecked, and the looming threat of execution was constant. Yet, in the midst of this living nightmare, Frankl observed something remarkable. Not everyone responded to suffering in the same way. Some lost all hope, collapsing under the weight of despair. Others, however, found an inner strength that transcended their circumstances. What made the difference? Why did some retain their humanity while others surrendered to meaninglessness? These questions would define Frankl's life's work, leading him to a groundbreaking realization, one that would later form the foundation of logotherapy. Unlike other psychological theories that focus on pleasure, Freud, or power, Adler, as the primary motivators of human behavior, Frankl argued that the most fundamental drive is the search for meaning. He saw this firsthand in the camps. Those who had a reason to live, whether it was reuniting with a loved one, finishing an unfinished work, or simply holding on to their dignity, were more likely to survive. Meaning, he discovered, was not a luxury, but a necessity. It was not something external given by society, but something each individual had to define for themselves. He wrote, "Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how." This idea was not just theoretical, it was a survival mechanism. Frankl himself clung to the vision of seeing his wife again, of one day lecturing about the psychological insights he was gathering in the depths of human suffering. Even when reality shattered those hopes, when he learned that his wife had perished, he did not let despair consume him. Instead, he deepened his conviction. If meaning could sustain a man in a death camp, then surely it could help anyone endure their struggles. The essence of logotherapy, the school of thought Frankl later developed, is simple yet profound. Meaning is the antidote to existential suffering. Unlike traditional therapy, which often seeks to resolve past traumas or diagnose mental disorders, logotherapy focuses on the future, on what a person can still achieve and become. Frankl believed that suffering, while inevitable, did not have to be meaningless. Even in the worst conditions, individuals retained the freedom to choose their response. This radical idea defied the deterministic views of psychology at the time. It suggested that no matter how much is taken from a person, they still possess the ability to decide their attitude toward life. Frankl called this the last of the human freedoms, the ability to find purpose, even in suffering. For him, this was not just philosophy. It was a hard-earned truth. He had witnessed people in the camps who, despite their own agony, shared their last piece of bread, who comforted others even as death loomed. This, he believed, was the ultimate proof that meaning could exist even in the darkest moments. But what does this mean for us today? We may not be prisoners in a physical sense, but many feel trapped in lives devoid of meaning. Modern society, with its endless distractions and relentless pursuit of success, often leaves people feeling empty, disconnected from something deeper. Frankl's story serves as both a warning and a guide. If he could find meaning in unimaginable suffering, then surely we can find it in our own struggles. The challenge is not the absence of meaning, but our unwillingness to search for it. We often expect meaning to be handed to us, rather than actively creating it. Frankl's journey teaches us that purpose is not something we passively receive. It is something we must fight for. It requires us to ask difficult questions. What truly matters to me? What am I willing to suffer for? How can I turn my pain into something meaningful? These are not easy questions, but they are the ones that separate those who drift aimlessly from those who live with conviction. The search for meaning is as old as human consciousness itself, but the conditions of modern life have made it uniquely challenging. We live in an era of unparalleled technological progress, where information is abundant, opportunities are vast, and material comfort is more accessible than ever before. And yet, despite all these advantages, a profound sense of emptiness lingers beneath the surface. Depression and anxiety rates continue to climb, feelings of isolation have intensified, and many people find themselves trapped in a cycle of endless distractions, constantly entertained but never truly fulfilled. The modern existential crisis is not just about questioning the meaning of life in an abstract sense. It is about feeling adrift in a world that moves too fast to provide any real sense of purpose. Everything is designed for immediate gratification, but nothing truly satisfies. In this environment, the search for meaning is no longer a philosophical luxury. It is a psychological necessity. One of the greatest obstacles to meaning in today's world is the overwhelming nature of choice. In the past, identity and purpose were largely dictated by tradition, religion, or cultural expectations. While this lack of autonomy had its limitations, it also provided a framework, a sense of belonging and direction. Today, we have unprecedented freedom to define ourselves. But this freedom comes at a cost, the weight of responsibility. Without a clear sense of purpose given to us, we must construct it ourselves. And in the absence of guidance, many people fall into existential paralysis, endlessly searching for an identity that feels authentic but never quite finding it. This is compounded by the constant comparison fostered by social media, where curated versions of other people's lives create an illusion of fulfillment that is always just out of reach. The result? A generation that is simultaneously hyper-connected and deeply lonely, constantly stimulated yet existentially numb. Viktor Frankl's ideas are more relevant than ever in addressing this crisis. He argued that meaning is not something we passively receive. It is something we must actively create. This stands in stark contrast to the modern culture of passive consumption, where people seek happiness through external achievements, possessions, or validation. But meaning is not found in wealth, status, or even comfort. Frankl observed that those who survived the concentration camps were not necessarily the physically strongest, but those who had a compelling reason to endure. In the same way, modern life's challenges, burnout, dissatisfaction, alienation, cannot be solved through escapism or material success alone. They require a deeper engagement with the fundamental question: what am I living for? Without an answer, no amount of external success will fill the void. To reclaim meaning in a disconnected world, we must shift our perspective. Rather than asking what life can give us, we must ask what we can give to life. Frankl emphasized that purpose is often found in responsibility, toward a person, a cause, or a creative pursuit. This is a radical departure from the modern obsession with self-centered fulfillment, where happiness is treated as the ultimate goal rather than a byproduct of meaningful action. The antidote to existential emptiness is not more distractions or more achievements. It is a conscious commitment to something greater than oneself. This may seem daunting, but it is also liberating. It means that meaning is always within reach, regardless of external circumstances. It is not something to wait for. It is something to build, moment by moment, decision by decision. If the modern existential crisis is rooted in a lack of meaning, then the solution must involve actively creating it. But how? This is where Viktor Frankl's philosophy stands apart from both traditional existentialism and modern self-help culture. He did not believe meaning was something to be stumbled upon by chance, nor did he think it could be artificially manufactured through superficial pleasures. Instead, he argued that meaning is something we must take responsibility for, something we forge through our actions, our choices, and our willingness to confront life's challenges with purpose. This idea is both empowering and daunting. It means that no matter our circumstances, we are not merely victims of fate. We have the ability and the obligation to shape our own existence. But taking responsibility for meaning is not easy, especially in a world that encourages passivity, distraction, and external validation. It requires a fundamental shift in how we approach life itself. Frankl's central belief was that, even in the worst of circumstances, we retain the freedom to choose our attitude. He saw this firsthand in the concentration camps, where those who found a purpose, whether it was helping others, holding on to a vision of the future, or even maintaining their dignity, were more likely to survive. This principle applies just as much to modern struggles. Many people today feel trapped in meaningless jobs, unfulfilling relationships, or an endless cycle of routine. They wait for something external to change, waiting for inspiration, for a new opportunity, for the right circumstances to give their lives meaning. But meaning is not something we wait for. It is something we commit to, even in imperfection. The question is not, does my life have meaning? But rather, how can I bring meaning into my life today? This shift from passivity to active responsibility is the first step in overcoming existential emptiness. One of the most powerful ways to cultivate meaning is through personal responsibility. Frankl believed that responsibility was the foundation of a meaningful life, and this idea challenges much of modern thinking. Today, there is a tendency to seek external solutions for internal problems, to blame circumstances, institutions, or even society itself for personal dissatisfaction. While external factors certainly play a role, Frankl's philosophy reminds us that ultimate responsibility lies within. He argued that meaning is found not in what happens to us, but in how we respond to it. This does not mean ignoring suffering or pretending that challenges do not exist. Rather, it means using every situation, no matter how difficult, as an opportunity for growth, learning, and purpose. A crisis, a failure, or a painful experience can all be transformed into something meaningful if we choose to engage with them rather than avoid them. Applying this philosophy requires practical steps. Instead of endlessly searching for abstract meaning, one must begin by taking concrete actions. This could mean dedicating oneself to a cause, creating something of value, or simply approaching everyday tasks with intention. It could mean finding purpose in relationships, in service to others, or in a personal passion. There is no universal formula. Meaning is deeply personal and must be discovered through experience, not theory. The key is to move beyond passive reflection and into action. Frankl himself did not overcome suffering by simply thinking about meaning. He lived it. He turned his pain into purpose, using his experiences to develop a philosophy that has helped millions find direction. This is the true path to overcoming the existential crisis, not by avoiding struggle, but by transforming it into something that gives life depth, richness, and significance. Suffering is often seen as something to be avoided at all costs. Modern culture treats pain as a defect, an unfortunate interruption in the pursuit of happiness. Yet, Viktor Frankl proposed a radically different perspective. Suffering, when approached with the right mindset, can become a gateway to deeper meaning. He did not romanticize pain. He had seen firsthand the depths of human agony in the concentration camps. But he also recognized something profound. Those who found meaning in their suffering, who could see it as part of a larger purpose, were more likely to endure it without losing themselves. In a world obsessed with comfort and ease, this idea is difficult to accept. But avoiding suffering does not eliminate it. It only makes us less prepared to face it when it inevitably arrives. Instead of asking, "How can I escape suffering?" Frankl urged us to ask, "How can I transform my suffering into something meaningful?" At its core, the paradox of suffering is that it forces us to confront what truly matters. When everything is going well, it is easy to drift through life without questioning deeper purpose. But when hardship strikes, a loss, a failure, a personal crisis, it disrupts our illusions of control. In these moments, we are faced with a choice: either succumb to despair or search for meaning within the pain. Frankl observed that those who chose the latter often emerged from suffering with a newfound sense of clarity and resilience. He believed that suffering could serve as a kind of existential refining process, stripping away superficial concerns and revealing what is most essential. This is why many of history's most profound thinkers, artists, and leaders have been shaped by hardship. Struggle forces self-examination, and self-examination leads to transformation. But for this process to take place, suffering must be engaged with consciously. It must be seen not as meaningless pain, but as a challenge to be met with purpose. In today's world, suffering is often silenced or dismissed. Social media presents a carefully curated illusion of effortless success and happiness, making real struggle feel abnormal. But suffering is not an exception to life. It is an integral part of it. The avoidance of pain does not make life more meaningful. It makes it shallower. Frankl's perspective challenges the modern impulse to numb discomfort with distractions, whether through entertainment, consumption, or temporary pleasures. He argued that true fulfillment comes not from the absence of suffering, but from the ability to endure it with purpose. This does not mean seeking out suffering needlessly, but rather recognizing that when it comes, as it inevitably does, it can serve as a catalyst for growth. The stories of those who have turned pain into purpose, survivors who dedicate their lives to helping others, artists who channel suffering into creation, individuals who emerge from personal crises with greater wisdom, are proof of this truth. Ultimately, the way we face suffering determines the kind of life we live. If we resist and resent it, we may find ourselves consumed by bitterness. But if we confront it with the mindset that Frankl proposed, seeing it as an opportunity to find meaning, we can emerge stronger, more compassionate, and more deeply connected to what matters. This does not make suffering easy, but it makes it bearable. More than that, it gives suffering a purpose, allowing it to shape us rather than destroy us. The existential crisis many face today is, at its root, a crisis of meaning. And meaning, Frankl teaches us, is not something we find in comfort alone. It is something we discover in how we respond to the inevitable trials of life. So the final question remains: when suffering comes, as it does for all of us, will we allow it to define us, or will we choose to define it? There is a silence that lingers beneath every existential crisis, a quiet, unspoken fear that perhaps life is just an empty stretch of time, without purpose, without deeper significance. Viktor Frankl stood face to face with this abyss and emerged with an answer. Meaning is not something we passively receive. It is something we create, something we must take responsibility for, even in suffering, even in despair. His life was proof that even in the most horrific conditions imaginable, human beings can choose to transcend their circumstances. And if meaning could be found in a concentration camp, it can certainly be found in the struggles of modern life. But that responsibility lies with us. No one else can give us meaning. No external force, no job, no relationship, no possession can substitute for the personal decision to live with purpose. The world today offers countless distractions, endless escapes from discomfort. But avoiding suffering does not lead to fulfillment. It only deepens the void. Meaning is not found in running from pain, but in facing it, transforming it, and using it as fuel for something greater. Frankl's message is not about naive optimism. It is about resilience. It is about the refusal to let suffering reduce us to victims, and instead, using it as a tool for growth, for strength, for deeper understanding. The choice is always there. The question is whether we are willing to take it. So, as this video ends, the real conversation begins. What are you living for? What responsibility are you willing to take for your own meaning? The search for purpose is not something to postpone, not something to wait for the right conditions to pursue. It begins now, in this moment, in the choices you make today. And the truth is, no matter how lost you feel, no matter how disconnected or uncertain, meaning is always within reach, but only if you are willing to create it.